Is 1199 in the house? Let's give it up for our president, George Gresham. It is good to be with family. And let's give it up for our President, Mary Kay. Where is she, Mary Kay? George, I'm starting to feel right at home. I feel like I'm an honorary member. I love 1199. Love SCIU. Today, I said to Brother Gresham, who is a leader among leaders, and when other folk talked about supporting us down south, he and Mary Kay and Gerald came down south, and we are forever grateful. Roz Pellis is here. Where's Roz? Hey, give it up for Roz Pellis. Now, George, when you said y'all didn't come here to hear me, there was a whole crowd over there that said, yes, we did. I've been thinking about this scripture in Luke chapter 12 that talks about the need to discern the meaning of the times. And I want to ask the question Dr. King asked in a contemporary way: where do we go from here? April the 9th, 2017 was the burial of Dr. King. He was shot exactly 1 year after he challenged the triune evils of racism, poverty, and militarism. One of the unions that did not leave him was 1199. You need to understand, when Dr. King spoke on April 4th, 1967 at Riverside Church and called out America on racism and war and poverty, the next morning 150 newspapers wrote articles against him, including some African American papers. Some unions came out against him. The civil rights came out against him. Even the organization that I serve wrote a resolution against him. Some of his own staff came out against him. 1199 stayed strong. Four months after he called for the Poor People's Campaign, December of 1967, he was shot in Memphis, assassinated, as he stood with garbage workers, sanitation workers, fighting for union rights and wages in Memphis. And he was shot as he was going around the country raising the question, where do we go from here, chaos or community? When he was shot, George Wallace was making another bid for the presidency. And in 1968, George Wallace did a speech that sounded, that if you didn't know any better, would sound just like Trump today. Richard Nixon was trying to figure out how to be Wallace undercover. Johnson had announced that he wasn't going to run. The Vietnam War was raging. The cry for tax cuts was howling. The language of states' rights, rolling back entitlements, was echoing through our political atmosphere. This question is relevant again today, especially after November 8th and 9th of last year. Because I'm sure that many of you said what I said, which is what Jesus said during Holy Week over 2,000 years ago, when Jesus saw a fig tree that had leaves but no figs. And the fig tree was a metaphor of a nation that was void of the character in which God intended for it. And Jesus rubbed around the dirt of the fig tree, the roots, and said, when I come back, I'm expecting some figs. And when he came back, the fig tree was still barren. And Jesus said to that fig tree what some of y'all said November 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. Jesus said, damn. That's actually what he said. It's in the scriptures. Condemn, damn. Many of y'all said that. How did we get here? And I believe, Sister Mary Kay and George and others, Roz, that we must have an analysis of how we got here in order to know where we go. Because all of that which we have done in the past may not be totally applicable or may have to be adjusted. Now, in school, they taught me about the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. I want to be a little professor today, and I want to talk to you in terms of auras, some R's that can help us understand how we got here. First way we got here is we got here politically in this country because of runaway money. Corporate media gave Donald Trump and others more than $1 billion of free media that helped to legitimize him in the minds of some and allow him to take his extremism policies mainstream, and they played with him too long. But also Citizens United, that anti-people, anti-worker bill that treats corporations like people and people like things. If you really want to have a sex conversation in America, we ought to be talking about the unholy intercourse between the Supreme Court and big business that produced the illegitimate child called Citizens United. And the kind of money that Citizens United loosed and produced helped us get here. Did you know in 2012 alone, Citizens United allowed, according to one study, Koch brothers money to contribute $400 million. That was 10 times more than all of the top unions combined. One family. How did we get here? We got here because of racist methods. Not only runaway money, but racist methods. Methods that are as American as apple pie. The kind of retrogression that always happens in America after a siege of racial progression. Neil Painter, a Princeton scholar, calls it America's call and response. The call is the advancement of social justice. The response is outbreaks of meanness and regression. And we've seen it before. I'm so concerned when I hear people say, we've never seen anything like this before in America. And sometimes I want to say, did you go to history class? Just like when people say, this is the worst thing we've ever seen. I say, really? It's worse than slavery? Worse than Jim Crow? Worse than the Holocaust? Come on. But we've seen this before. In fact, in 1877, there had been 12 years of progress after slavery and the end of the Civil War. Progress in voting, progress in black and white, blacks being represented in state houses and in the Congress of these United States and in the Senate. Progress on criminal justice reform, even union progress and wage progress. But then in 1877, a presidential candidate lost the popular vote, but was selected by the Electoral College if he promised to cut taxes, roll back civil rights, and give the Supreme Court back to the extremists. His name was Rutherford B. Hayes. This is 1877. And they worked out a compromise. People that didn't even like each other necessarily, but they worked out a compromise because what they really wanted was a return of white supremacy. And if you go back and read some of their language and look at books that were written about their era, in essence, they said, we've got to stop all of this black-white unity and fusion movement because we need to take back our country and make it great again. We've seen things before, maybe not exactly, but we need to know this history. It happened, Jerry, in 1916, almost 100 years exact, when Woodrow Wilson was elected president, and he played the race card immediately. He undermined the desegregation of the federal government. He embraced white supremacy, even though he had been a president of a college, because education doesn't necessarily deal with racism. He had been president of a college and governor, but he was a racist. And long before Steve Bannon was in the White House, Woodrow Wilson had Birth of a Nation in the White House. The most racist, revisionist movie of the early 20th century. Oh, we've seen it before. Richard Nixon was elected at the end of the 1960s when civil rights and unions had made great progress. He said his goal was to restore law and order, make the country great again, reduce entitlements, cut taxes. He was informed that if he used language like that, he wouldn't sound like a racist, but his policies would have a race impact, and it would also split black and white voters from working with each other. We've seen it before. We've seen this kind of rollback. We've seen this kind of reactionary politics. So what we're seeing today is not an anomaly, and until we get that as a country, we can't understand how we got here. This is not an anomaly. This is as American as apple pie. One writer said Trump ran his campaign sensing the feeling of dispossession and anxiety among millions of voters, white voters in the main, and many of those voters, not all, but many followed Trump because he was willing to trumpet their fury and affirm their sense deeply rooted in this nation's history of race and class, that a new world had conspired against their interests. Now Trump, this writer says, offers no answers to their fears. He merely says, you are afraid, you ought to be afraid, you are right to be afraid. Obama is a boogeyman of a coming diversity that will undo the world you grew up in, and I alone can save you. Philip Klinkner, a political scientist at Hamilton College. Can I teach a moment? Philip Klinkner, a political scientist at Hamilton College and an expert on race relations, looked at some data, and he said that what he found out from the evidence of the 2016 election is that it is very clear that attitudes about blacks, immigrants, and Muslims were the key component of Trump's appeal. He looked at the data. This is not just somebody saying it emotionally. He looked at the data. He said the surveys and the polls of Trump voters found a strong relationship between anti-black attitudes and support for Trump. Trump supporters being more likely to describe African Americans as criminal, unintelligent, lazy, and violent. More likely to believe people of color are taking white jobs, and a majority of them rating blacks as less evolved as white. This is data. And you say, well, there was some black people that voted for Trump. Well, there were some black people that wanted to stay in slavery. There were some black people that didn't march with Dr. King. There's a young man, I pray for him every time I see him on CNN. The other night, I think his name is Paris. He was so mad. He was so mad that they joked about Donald Trump. They shouldn't joke about him. I'm like, where's all that anger when Trump was talking about America? Obama wasn't born here. Racist methods. Another writer said this, and Jerry, this one really grabbed me. He said Donald Trump appropriated much of Sanders' rhetoric about Wall Street, bankers, billionaires, and the global economy, adding his own Trumpism, which was vitriol against immigrants, African Americans, Muslims, gangs, drug dealers, and women, and many people bought the con. And history shows that just getting rid of Trump will not fix everything that has gone wrong in the United States. And then this writer said something that really grabbed me. He said, focusing on his obvious personality disorders may be entertaining, but it's not a winning strategy. He said, this is a historical moment of realignments and transformation here and around the world. There's something happening with this whole white hegemony and strong men and the women around the world. And then he says, Donald Trump is merely a symptom. And even if he was removed from office tomorrow, we still have much work to do. Trump is a symptom, and race was and is a major part of the symptom, not just him. And because he co-opted some of Labor's language, he got some of Labor to vote for him. Because of what he said about TPP and NAFTA and promising he was going to drain the swamp. He didn't tell you he was going to fill it back up with corporate alligators. He didn't tell you that. And people bought the language because they didn't understand something about racism and someone who uses racism to win elections or to win anything. See, when I was young, my grandmama taught me, if you scratch a liar, you'll find a thief. Am I talking about that? And some of my white brothers and sisters who thought you could trust Trump on labor even while he was being a racist, let me tell you, if you scratch a racist, you're going to find a liar, because racism is a lie. You can't trust somebody who's a racist that didn't do right by workers in America. And let me push this race piece a little bit, because this, I heard today, and I think it was Miss Clinton today. She was doing an interview, a very fine interview, and she said, however, they asked her why the election went a certain way, and she said, well, we got to talk about some of the Russian hacking, and she talked about a few other things, but, sometimes I want to say to my progressive brothers and sisters, you better learn how to talk about race. And I ain't just talking about David Dukes and no Confederate flag. I'm talking about systemic racism. Huh? Because listen. When Donald Trump supposedly slips and says certain things about the Civil War and Andrew Jackson, I don't believe that's a slip. You can't be slipping this much. Those are shrewd, coded ways of saying how I feel to a certain constituency that loves the red meat. You better read that Duke Scholar's book on racism without racists today. But not only that, it's not just we didn't get here just because of Trump or the extremists who claim to be Republicans, because I don't call folk Republican. My granddaddy was a Republican. He was a Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt Republican. So, there's extremists. But even whoever, Democrats, the most underreported story, George, is that long before the Russians did anything hacking our system, the American system of voting was hacked by voter suppression. Race-driven voter suppression. And what's interesting about that is that we had over 25 debates, presidential, Democrat and Republican. Democrat and Republican, because if you're going to deal with this moment we're in, you have to give a critique of both. You had 25 presidential election debates of Democrats and Republicans, and you didn't have one full debate on voting rights. Now, voting is the fundamental mechanics of a democracy. We now are in a time when the Voting Rights Act has been gutted, and we just went through a presidential election, which was the first time in 52 years we didn't have the protection of the Voting Rights Act. And the Congress, not Trump, or the Congress has upheld under Boehner and Ryan and McConnell, have upheld fixing the Voting Rights Act since June 25th, 2013. When I stopped counting, Mary Kay, that was over 1,400 days. Now let me put that in context. Strom Thurmond only filibustered the 1957 Civil Rights Act for 24 hours. The current leadership has refused to engage in fixing the Voting Rights Act and engage in a political filibuster for over 1,000 days. And we didn't have one full election, one debate, Democrat or Republican. We didn't have one full debate on living wages. We had more of a talk about texts and emails than we had about living wages and health care. We didn't have one full debate on poverty. Ryan will talk about poverty, but he talks about it in all the wrong ways. You know, like the poor children, if you give them free lunch, you're going to leave a hole in their soul, crazy stuff like that. Suggesting that poor folk are on some kind of glorified vacation. So, and he's slick with it because he covers it as though he's being religious with it, but it's really a form of hypocrisy. And then on the other side, Democrats talk about the middle class, or those trying to get in the middle class. They act like they can't even say poor. And all of that is rooted, if you look close enough, in a race analysis because of the way poverty and certain things have been racialized. I'm gonna push this in a minute. But let me go back to the voting thing. In this voting piece, you talk about racism. When you look at it, 22 states since 2010 passed voter suppression laws. 22 states. Now, that's 254 electoral votes. That's 54% of African Americans in those states. That's over 50% of the Congress, the House of Representatives, and 44 senators in those 22 states. Last year, this is before we knew about the Russian thing. Last year, according to Ari Berman, there were 868 fewer election sites in the black, brown, and poor community that suppressed hundreds of thousands of votes. Now, Trump only won, they claim it only 80,000 votes in 3 states, but there were hundreds of thousands. And have you heard 3 news stories on it? Nope. Have you heard 2? No. Even in many progressive circles, we're not talking about this. And then we've done some maps through repairs of the breach. Now, we decided to get funky with it. That's what we used to say back in the day. I had to say that, George. I'm just sorry. That back in the day. So what we did was we took a map and we put all the 22 states where there was voter suppression. And I asked my staff, I said, I want to see something. I said, now overlay that with the states that denied Medicaid expansion. Same states pretty much. I said, now overlay that with the states that don't have a living wage. I said, now overlay that with the states that have the highest level of poverty, all people. I said, now overlay that with the states that have the highest level of white poverty. Now overlay that with the states that have the highest levels of child poverty. Now overlay that with the states that have the highest level of black poverty. Now overlay that with the states that are passing these regressive laws against the LGBTQ community. And then overlay that with the states that claim to have the highest number of so-called white evangelicals. And they were pretty much the same states. Wherever you find the voter suppression, you find the suppression of every other issue that you care about in this union. And that's what we talk about when we talk about a race analysis. It's not just talking about when somebody calls you the N-word. We're talking about systemic policies of racism. Like, for instance, New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Tennessee, Michigan, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, where you have some of the highest numbers of African Americans who are eligible to vote, and places where if you brought black and white and brown people together, you could change elections. Guess what they all have in common? None of them do early voting. None of them. New York, Michigan, where we have highest concentration of African Americans. That's straight up voter suppression. We have same-day registration in North Carolina, early voting. We had to fight for it in the South, and you don't have it in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in New York. Oh, we need to understand how we got here before we talk about where we go from here. You want to hear another racism? Listen at racism. This is going to sound like the most racist thing you ever heard. It just said yesterday in relationship to this health care. Now, y'all get ready. I mean, you might can't stand it. It's going to be so racist. If you got any children, close their ears because it's going to sound so racist. This is Representative Mo Brooks, an Alabama Republican. He says, the reason I'm against this Obamacare is that reason I'm for Trump care, he says, it will allow insurance companies to require people who have higher health care costs to contribute more to the insurance pool that helps to offset these costs, thereby reducing the cost to the people who lead good lives. It's racist. Did you hear that? Close your ears. Y'all can't stand it. It says who lead good lives, they are healthy, they've done things to keep their bodies healthy, explained Brooks. And right now, those are the people who have done things the right way that are seeing their costs skyrocketing. Now he ain't used the N-word nowhere in there. But when he says the people who, that's some old language that comes out of the southern strata. Now what's interesting about that is more white people are being hurt in Alabama by the denial of Medicaid and health care than they are black. But he racializes it and suggests that the people that would benefit are these lazy people who don't deserve it, which traces back to a racist lexicon as old as the Southern strategy. And that is, and the reason they talk that way is to keep splitting black and whites who need to be allies. You see what I'm saying? Because see, in reality, there are 8 million more poor white people than there are black people. There are 5 million more poor white people than there are black people in absolute numbers, not per capita, but in absolute numbers. And you can't afford white and black people and Latinos to come together, especially in these southern and Rust Belt states, because if they ever figure out that if they come together, they can build an alliance that can transform politics. And then if you get rid of redistricting that stacks and packs black voters in a way, not only that you can't elect black elected officials, but you undermine the ability to build fusion politics. We need to discern the times. Discern the time. Well, let me rush on. I said racist methods, but then there's something else. We also are here because of the refusal to use power when we have it. You know, one of these days, Democrats going to learn how to use power. See, even though I like Obamacare, I want universal health care. That's what we ought to have. And when you got the votes, you ought to do it. Because I tell you what, I bet you the extremists, they will do it when they get the power. And you do it and make the case for it. We being the only industrialized country that doesn't provide that kind of health care is wrong. Huh? When you suggest that health care ought to only go to those who can buy it, that's immoral. Huh? So one of the things progressives have got to learn how to do is use power. You remember when Dr. King one time said, look, a law might not make you love me, but it'll keep you from lynching me. What he was saying is that, yes, sometimes we want everybody to come along. I understand that. But there are times when you know what's right, you have to do what's right and let folk figure it out when they figure it out. You remember the jobs bill? It was Democrats. Held it up in the Senate. The Obama jobs bill. We got to tell the progressives, you can't run on a progressive agenda and then govern like an extremist light. You can't run and get power and promise us a living wage, and then when you get in office, you keep negotiating down to make other folk happy. When you get the power, use it for good. There's another R. There's another R that's got us here. The resistance to build an off-year strategy in southern and Rust Belt states. That's got us where we are. Union. I ain't talking to y'all, SEIU. I'm saying that because even the union movement and the civil rights movement, we write off the South, write off Rust Belt. We talk about blue walls that are tore all to hell. We give up. Do you know if you give up 13 southern states from Virginia to Texas, you give up 171 electoral votes? Which means whoever's running, if they get those 13 states, they only need 99 electoral votes from the other 37 states. If you give up 13 southern states, you give up 31% of the House of Representatives without a fight. You give up 26 Senate seats. You only need 25 from the other 37 states. Now I need to confess to y'all. I don't like doing it. Media's around. I used to hustle pool. I'm sorry. I ain't had no money. My girlfriend wanted to go somewhere. I go to the back of my car and get my stick out. Corner pocket. They didn't call me Fats Domino. They called me Big Billy. And I hope y'all don't mind. I hope that doesn't make y'all think bad. I mean, I've told it to my pastor and repented, but I'm telling you, when I hustle, if you give me 171 points to a 270 race, and I'll take that bet any day. And our resistance to build a movement, not build an election strategy when the election is going on, but a movement, because that's what the Koch brothers and others are doing. They ever since 1973, they said they're going to build movement. They don't just organize during an election year. They have strategy going on all the while. And then lastly, last two things, what's got us here is religious hypocrisy. Religious hypocrisy. Well, we've got folk claiming that they are evangelicals. I'm an evangelical. I'm a theologically evangelical, conservative, liberal, biblicist, charismatic. In other words, I know Jesus for myself. And And Jesus' first sermon said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach good news to the poor. And the word poor there in Greek means patokos. It means those who've been made poor because of economic exploitation. So when you claim to be some kind of religious evangelical and the only thing you care about is prayer in the school, homosexuality, abortion, property rights, and trying to make Jesus a founding member of the NRA, that is not evangelicalism. That is theological malpractice and heresy. You got to understand what's going on. In this past election, we saw folk under the guise of religion just go running to support someone. And behind it all, it's a long history I don't have time to deal with. You ought to read Kevin Cruz's book, One Nation Under God, about how so much of that side of it was bought off and paid off. It's counter to the kind of faith of Frederick Douglass or Dorothy Day or Rabbi Heschel or Dr. King. There is no way, and I say this standing flat-footed, to claim religious allegiance to our deepest religious values and then support policies that hurt the poor and hurt children and hurt women and hurt the immigrant and hurt the least of these. There are 3,000 scriptures in the Bible about those issues. And the other things that people bring up, they're saying a whole lot about what God says, so little and so little about what God said. And we need to challenge hypocrisy. And there are two ways this religious hypocrisy happens. Either it's this out front, covert theological malpractice, or it's this inverted, all you need to do is have a praise team, where faith ain't nothing but a party with no political consciousness. Oh, no. That's not the faith of our mothers. That's not the faith that got us through slavery. That's not the faith that got us through Jim Crow. That's not the faith that undergirds the labor movement. That's not the faith that says, woe unto them who legislate evil and rob the poor of their right and make women and children their prey. And we need a faith that understands that when you're called to be a preacher or you're called to be a rabbi or you're called to be an imam, you are not called to be a chaplain of the empire, but a prophet to the nations. And then lastly, we got here through ridiculous lies. Lord, there's some lying going on. I was looking at a fact this morning that says that Trump has lied 480 times in the first 100 days. One day lied 10 times on policy. Other day, no, they ain't alternative fact, they're alternative lies. Don't be repeating Kelly and they, see, because if you say alternative facts, that suggests that it's factual. These are straight up alternative lies. When you will lie and know somebody has a video of you saying something exactly the opposite, that ain't an alternative fact, that's a downright lie. Straight up. They said one day he only told, it says 6 times, let me see, it says one day 6 times, I think, it says he didn't tell but any lies, but he was on the golf court that day. And then 4 days he told 20 or more lies. And then he supported. And that's really what this left-right conservative liberal, it gets us into lying because people cover up like, well, no, this is just a conservative point of view, and this is the liberal. No, some things are just lies. They're not like equal opposites. The Affordable Care Act or Obamacare was bad. That's a lie. Now, it wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't what we wanted. Yeah. A wall between us and Mexico will save us. That's just a lie. That ain't a conservative point of view. That's just a lie. Minimum wage is already too high. He said that. Yeah, Trump said that. And a lot of people that that he's working with in the Congress, they believe that. Have they raised the minimum wage? Then they must believe it's already too high. Cutting taxes for the wealthy will help the working people and the working poor. That's just a lie. Truth is, we've been drowning in a flood of low-wage jobs for 40 years. Most of the income of people in poverty comes from work. 104 million people, a third of the population, have annual incomes below twice the poverty line. That's less than $38,000 for a family of four. Half of the jobs in the nation pay less than $34,000 a year. And this is something we've been dealing with. It's a long-term period. The richest 400 Americans have more wealth than the bottom 50%. 8 of the most wealthiest people in the world own nearly more than 50% of the people at the bottom. 1% of the nation owns 42% of the nation's private wealth. And that's not class hating. That is saying the 1%, they do not get that wealth, but on the backs of the other people who work for it. And when you don't share profits, that's wrong. 52% of fast food workers were dependent on public assistance. $7 billion of government welfare to corporations who refuse to pay their workers enough to live. You know the lies. I'm going to build a pipeline and use American steel. Lie. We need to cut Meals on Wheels and other programs so we can increase the military budget by $54 billion. There's two reasons that's a lie. Actually, you don't have to cut one or the other. We got the money to do both if you want to do that, if everybody paid their fair share. But more importantly, it makes no sense. We already have a bloated military budget. You know what $54 billion could do? 971,000 infrastructure jobs, 6.6 million Head Start slots, 1.63 million scholarships for 4-year school, 2.3 million students receiving Pell Grants, 15.7 million adults receiving low-income health care. That's what $54 million. But when you're in a culture that will name a bomb mother, think about that. Mother's supposed to mean creation and love and nurturing. And when you will name a bomb the mother of all bombs, it is a sign that somebody's lying to themselves about what really matters and what really our purpose is in life. And so I think those are some reasons we got here. Well, if that's how we got here, then where do we go from here? First of all, there ain't but one antidote for a lie. You gotta tell the truth. And I think every convention we have and every gathering we have, whether it's the union movement or it's the civil rights movement or it's the church movement, we've got to tell the truth. We have to combat the lies. Because whenever someone constantly lies and lies and lies, people can enter a kind of depression when it just looks like they can't be stopped. And only the truth can set us free. Tell your neighbor, say, neighbor, if you love me, tell me the truth. Tell me the truth. Truth is, racism is wrong. Truth is, injustice is wrong. Truth is, denying health care is wrong. Truth is, trying to break the back of unions is wrong. Truth is, we can do better. Not only must you tell the truth, but we're going to come up from here, we got to fight back. Touch your neighbor and say, fight back. I like the way Mother Jones said it back in the 1800s. She said, pray for the dead, but fight like hell for the living. I like the way A. Philip Randolph said it. A. Philip Randolph said, if somebody tried to deprive you of your rights, you got to resist. You got to resent. You got to fight against it. I like what Franklin Delano Roosevelt said. He said, no business which depends for its existence on paying less than a living wage to its workers has any right to continue in this country. And if they want to fight me, bring it on. I like what Dr. King said, not at the March on Washington. I love that too, but I like what he said in 1968. He said, it's a crime for people to live in this rich nation and receive starvation wages. It's criminal to have people working on a full-time basis, on a full-time job, getting part-time income. And then Dr. King said, if America does not use her vast resources of wealth to end poverty and to make it possible for all of God's children to have the basic necessities of life, just like the rich man went to hell when he wouldn't help the poor man, so too will America go to hell. Somebody got to fight back. Yeah, God. Touch your neighbor and say, there ain't nobody playing. You got to fight hate with love. You got to fight wrong with right. You got to fight meanness with kindness. You got to fight. You got to get in the street. You got to get in the offices. You got to stand up. You can't take a day off. You got to fight. Too many people work too hard, bled too much, cried too long. It's time. And then touch your neighbor and say, neighbor, I don't want to hear you talking about you tired. If they made it through slavery, if they made it through Jim Crow, if folk made it through the Holocaust, you better stand up and act like you know. Oh, God. We cannot accept poverty as a norm, or racism as a norm. Can't do it. You can't accept attacking immigrants in the country of immigrants as a norm. You can't accept it. But not only must we tell the truth and fight back, we have to have steadfast unity. We got to stay together. We can't keep fighting in our silos. No more separating issues. Labor over here, voting rights over here, when the same people fighting against those issues are fighting all of us together. You got to come together. And so, George, I'm going to my seat, Mr. President. But for the last few days, I just got back from Highlander, and we went to 22 states, and there's fire for a movement. And we've been talking about dealing with this madness and looking at all these adoration tours. We can't keep just focusing on Trump. We got to focus on the deeper sickness and the moral failings of the nation. And we got to find a way to come together so we don't have movement fatigue. It's great to have all of our marches and everything, but I'm hoping that for a few days next year, we all can do something together, because when we all get together. And so a group of us, myself and Dr. Forbes and Sister Simone, Tracy Blackman and Laraz and others, and Kairos Center, next year is the 50th anniversary of the Poor People's Campaign, and it wasn't finished. And it needs to be finished, and it needs to be continued, it needs to be broadened. And so we've decided to call for the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival. We just launched the Souls of Poor People, auditing America 50 years after the Poor People's Campaign raised the issue of race and poverty and militarism and national morality. Some of the best economists, theologians, historians, and poor folk are sitting at the table. And by poor folk, we mean all forms of poverty. Working poor, people are homeless. And they're putting that audit together because America understands an audit. Well, some of us do. But you got to audit this country. And you got to show what Joseph Stiglitz showed in his book, The Nobel Peace Prize, how inequality hurts everybody. How it hurts everybody. And then we're going to get on the road, George, and we're going to go to regional places. We're going down to the border in El Paso. We're going to the poorest counties in this country. We're going to the urban areas. We're going to the mountains. And we're going to begin to organize people, and we've got stars and other people that are saying they want to come in, and the Kairos Center has been working on this for years, and Repairs has been talking about it around the country, and ministers and rabbis and others. But then from Mother's Day next year until Juneteenth, what if, I'm just saying, well, I'm dreaming. Can I dream for a minute and I'm through? What if for 40 days we could have 3 days a week at a minimum simultaneous civil disobedience around a clear agenda around living wages and voting rights and health care and poverty and criminal justice reform and equal protection? What if in every state capital in at least 25 states, 50 people, at least 50, would go in and sit in the governor's office simultaneously, and 150 would go into not outside of the Capitol in Washington, D.C., but it's time for us to go inside. I'm tired of those rallies outside, and they keep raising mess on the inside. And what if 75 were in Ryan's office and 75 were in Paul, and what if we were demanding an agenda, and what if this agenda was footnoted by the best minds and those who not only write the policies but live the policies? And what if for 40 days we said we're going to do this to stir up and to raise racism and violence, and the violence of racism, the violence of poverty and militarism, to a new national conversation, and demand that never again will we go through another election cycle where those issues are not dealt with, and we ask people, where do you stand on these issues? And what if we could breathe inspiration and hope into the poor and into others all around this country? And what if we did it for 40 days? And what if we ended up with something like 20 to 25,000 people who would engage in civil disobedience, and it'd be the largest sustained moment of civil disobedience around an agenda in the history of the country? And then what if we finished that, we then launched a massive voter registration and voter engagement plan? And what if we went to states that people didn't expect us? And what if we did it simultaneously? And what if we didn't quit? And what if we stayed together? I want to see what will happen when we get on one accord. I'm a preacher. I know one time when they got on one accord, some wind blew and some fire came, and they spoke in other tongues, and Pentecost happened. And I know one time when they got together, some people were scared in the upper room, but when they got together, they got strong, and they stood up to a tower building, gold over land, putting his name on the money, Caesar of the ancient world. It's happened before. And what if it happened again? And I stopped by to tell you, it can happen. We're going to work toward it happening. I'm going to try, George, to give all I got with Roz and you and other folk to see, can't we make it happen? And what if for 40 days all of us would unite? And SEIU 1199 would take 2 days, and Black Lives Matters would take 2 days, and Lord have mercy, and Mar Monday 2 days, and the unions 2 days, and the steel workers 2 days. And what if we took 2 days, the rabbis 2 days, and the preachers 2 days, and the imams 2 days? And what if we made them arrest us in our work clothes, and in our vestments, and in our collars? Oh God, what could happen if we revive the prophet's work, but then carry it on forward, and we say that we will never be satisfied with anybody being hungry, or anybody not having a living wage, or anybody under the weight of systemic racism. We will not be satisfied by a economy and a country that's driven more by war policies than what is right on behalf of the least of these. And I stopped by to tell you, somebody's scared of that. I declare this is my last, I'm quitting. I know they're scared of it. And this is how I know, George, and y'all forgive me, but something done got a hold of me up here. See, here's the deal. I know it'll work because I know how hard people are trying to work to keep it from working. See, I look at things differently. I read a sermon one time called The Blessing of an Enemy. It says sometimes you know how strong you are by what people throw against you. Let me help y'all and I'm through. If they had to engage in the worst voter suppression since the 19th century, and then spend pornographic sums of money, and then go all the way to Russia to get them to help hack the system, and then depend on 97 million voters not voting, and then work to separate black, white, and Latino from voting, and then push the worst redistricting plans in the country that we've seen since the 19th century. If they had to do all that to win, that must mean we're strong, because you don't cheat somebody that you can win in a fair fight. I stopped by to tell you, we ought to try coming together, because when somebody's working to keep you from coming together, you ought to do it just to spite them. We can't bow down. We must fight back. We must stand up. And I know I'm a preacher, but I declare I'm going to drop Tupac. We ain't meant to survive because it's a setup. And even though you're fed up, you got to keep your head up. Keep your head up. Oh, child. Oh, child.